Focus on Liberia. We discuss everything Liberia, from education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the third edition of the LSA Monthly Scholar Series. The Liberian Studies Association is a nonprofit scholarly organization that provides a platform for cooperation and collaboration among scholars interested in furthering research in all scholarly disciplines relevant to the Republic of Liberia. And the LSA produces the second oldest African Studies journal published continuously in the United States, which is the Liberian Studies Journal. We're happy today to have as our guest Dr. Emmanuel Oritsejafor, who is also the editor of the Liberian Studies Journal. Dr. Oritsejafor is a professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at North Carolina Central University. As I said previously, he's also the editor-in-chief of the Liberian Studies Journal. The Liberian Studies Journal is the second oldest African Studies journal published continuously in the United States and is one that you should be subscribing to. Professor Oritsejafor's research focus include the political economy of sub-Saharan Africa, international relations, comparative politics, and nonprofit management. He is a prolific author. In 2021, he received the Faculty Award for Research in the College of Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities at NCCU. His publications include Governance and Democracy in Africa, Regional and Continental Perspectives, which he co-authored with Dr. James Gusset, and it was selected by the African Studies and Research Forum as the Best Book Award. He is also the author of National Integration in Liberia and Evolving Pursuit. Today, we are going to discuss his most recent book titled Indigenous Knowledge, an Alternative for Food Security and Wellness in Africa. In the book, Professor O argues that indigenous knowledge food systems have been neglected in relation to current global food security, and it needs to play a central role in addressing food insecurity. We're also happy that our co-host today is Dr. Samuel Y. Johnson Jr. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Jackie. Hi, Dr. O.
Hey,
Sam
Sam. How are you?
Professorial lecturer at the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C., and a board member of the Liberian Studies Association. So it's going to be very interesting today. So welcome, everybody. And let's begin. Prof, we're going to start discussing your book, Indigenous Knowledge. Yes. And first, I guess we would like to know, how did this project come about in writing this book?
Yeah. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Sam. It's really an exciting time to start examining this whole issue of food insecurity. But the process started for me quite a bit of time ago. It goes as far back as 2004, when I had my first seminal work on food security. And during 2004, I did some work with African Affairs, where I wrote a piece on looking at food management and insecurity with a specific focus on the use of biotechnology. And from there on, I visited our very famous and prestigious conference, the Liberian Studies Conference, also in 2004, somewhere in upstate New York, where I basically presented a paper on looking at folk medicine as an alternative for addressing mental illness in an environment where you have a dearth of health infrastructure. And at that time, I partnered with my better half, who is in the medical area, to address such issues. And I ran into Dr. Thomason, who is in upstate New York at a university there that skipped my mind. And he was very excited about the fact that I'm looking at indigenous stuff. So I should really give the credit to the Liberian Studies Association for giving me the impetus to do the work. Several years later, in 2021, 22. And so I can't take all the credit. I think I had a lot of support over the years. And that's why when we go to some of these conferences, we should take comments and inputs from our colleagues very seriously. And even Dr. Samuel Way, who's on the platform, did some work in 2010, the Liberian Studies Journal. And so, and I'm very, very careful to make sure nobody's left out, because they've all made contributions over time. And the evidence is from all of these scholars, including our host tonight, has been very instrumental in moving me forward. So that by itself, it's the beginning. Then I got to the point where I have basically done a lot of extensive work in this area. And I just said to myself, I got to do better than this. I have to take it and bring it all together in a very, very progressive and also very thought-provoking manner, to start asking ourselves, what has happened to all these development paradigms that has been prescribed by our multilateral institutions to address food insecurity, particularly in developing states, but narrowing down to the continent or to sub-Saharan Africa is very important. And I took from there, trying to figure out whether I can make a major contribution or a small contribution to looking for development paradigms. I am with the belief that some of these paradigms have just not been good enough in addressing some of the challenges we face with development. And as scholars, it's incumbent upon us to identify alternative. It can't just be something descriptive. We have to be a lot more prescriptive, because we face severe challenges all over the global South, particularly in Africa. And more, Liberia is very dear to my heart. That's my second home. So I have case studies on Liberia, on Democratic Republic of Congo, on Zimbabwe, on Ghana, and on Nigeria. So, and I think from this book, everybody can get a little piece of what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa. So I have about 5 countries, I believe, as case studies there. So it was challenging, but I did what I could do, bring a lot of the issues to light. For example, the chapter that has the case study on Liberia, there's a comparative analysis of what's going on in war-torn countries and what happened with food insecurity and in Liberia and Democratic Republic of Congo. These countries are not homogeneous, but they share common trends in terms of the implications of war and food insecurity. Yep. So I'll just stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. O. Yeah, I mean, before Sam comes in, he's going to lead the discussion. He's the economist, and he's the everything. As I was reading it, I said I was just going to start asking questions that the lay person could ask. So I was very struck by the fact that you have all these different countries in South Asia, the Native Americans, and you're showing all of these indigenous systems that have sustained the communities throughout centuries,
Right.
and how basically they're under attack. If not under attack, they are being relegated to the back. I mean, one thing I learned in the book, if I may, Sam, is that I didn't know that bitter leaf was good for diabetes. And you may have forgotten that because just a little bit, but I was like, oh, really? I didn't know that.
Well, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. So you're absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that if you look at how indigenous practices inform medicine, inform well-being, inform choices in food, throughout the ages, and you can almost say, it has come full circle, because now people are talking about aromatherapy, people are talking about organic foods, and I'm saying that, oh, okay, but most of these things, that's what we used to eat back home a long time ago. When you're sick, you drink peppermint tea. When you have little itch, they put some ashes on you. So all of these indigenous things are things that should be practiced, or should not be relegated to the past. So I learned a lot from reading the book. So Sam, I'll
You
go over to you.
Yeah, Dr. O, I read your book as basically saying that we are largely food insecure because we do not place a premium on local knowledge, the knowledge that has been
absolutely
transferred from one
right,
generation to the.
right. Absolutely.
Am I correct in that?
Yeah, you're correct, and you're taking a page of what Jackie was pointing out, that at the beginning of the book and thereafter, I established a theoretical argument that this issue of food insecurity and indigenous knowledge is nothing new. That when we do go back to what indigenous communities have done in South Asia, like Bangladesh, and also in Northwest America among the American Indians. I also traveled to Australia for 2 weeks, where I met with folks at the University of Sydney, where there's a strong focus on indigenous knowledge. And my argument is simply what both of you are saying. If over the last couple of centuries, indigenous communities survived without our technology, without all this modern technology, and they've been able to sustain their development, why should we then throw the baby away with the bathwater? And I'm not arguing that you should not consider technology, but the extent to which we consider it has to be done in a way where there's an amalgamation of indigenous knowledge and modern agro-technological approach to farming or even to healthcare. So which absolutely is the brain thrust of a lot of what we see even in modern medicine. The issue of bitter leaf, there's a chapter there on Nigeria and Ghana, where I even look at indigenous knowledge for addressing coastal problems. When you go to Nigeria and some other parts of Africa, I mean, with the global warming, there's a lot of serious flooding taking place all over Nigeria. About 800 people died about a few months ago in Nigeria just from, flooding. The issue of bitter leaf. I have a typology of different food spices and food that are being grown over time to address issue of food insecurity. So my thought process is this: if food insecurity if indigenous knowledge is used and is used appropriately, because it has its own challenges, then you can begin to look at some of the depth of the problems we face by employing some of the systemic approaches which those before us have used. The whole idea of the bitter leaf, for example, my father drinks bitter leaf juice. And the first time I took it, I was like, oh no, how do you do this? So he said, son, I have done everything I can with my diabetes, but this is the thing that kept me going. And he lived to about 90 something years. Never took, I bought him some of those blood sugar stuff. He always kind of hurt himself and he said, forget it. So, and he ended up with bitter leaf juice. And that's how he survived. And he's 92 now, so. So there's
an interesting.
There's a value in some of the things we grow locally, but the other challenge is how much of the bitter leaf juice should he drink? That's another.
Yeah, that's another question.
Yeah, that's another question. Yeah.
So it's and I see your work. If you look at the whole definition of food insecurity, the issue of availability, accessibility, and utilization, I see you trying to draw a connection between. You're trying to use food knowledge to tie the three together. I mean, indigenous knowledge to tie the three together. And which is an interesting point because oftentimes when we talk about food insecurity in Africa, people tend to look at availability without considering the question of accessibility and utilization. Utilization brings all of these health benefits that you talk about. Like in my own work, what I found out is, yeah, food could be available, but if you do not address the inequality and income question, you wouldn't be able to have people accessing the available food, and so they want to be food insecure.
Absolutely. And I think your work is very, very interesting because I was just at the depth of getting into this Liberia stuff, and I saw some of the things you've done, and I'm like, okay. But I went further to look at the fact that during the war between 1989 and 2003, based on even what you propounded, war communities are often faced with the challenges of food insecurity. Then when you go beyond 2003, the 14 years thereafter, what we dealt with in Liberia from 2004 up to this junction was the issue of dealing with the global challenges in terms of the surge of food prices. And that's one. And secondly, we also have to think about the income of those who are consuming this food. The disastrous and unbelievable concern that I even have in the case of Liberia, you have that income issue. You have the issue of also the global issue that we have to adjust to. The third piece that we don't often talk about is the importation of food. Liberia the importation of food has even made us even far more dependent on food that is being imported. I mean, instead of eating the local rice, folks still want to eat the Uncle Ben's. Then the people who wants to eat the Uncle Ben's at times cannot even afford it because of income. And those who can afford it are very, very, very small, fractional. But the total number of dependency ought to be quantified. So in my book, I came up with the number based on the data at the point that over $20 million is being spent on food importation. For a small country like ours, Liberia, when you start spending 20 million food importation, it further deepens not only the dependency on food, but the insecurity that is inherent because the rural and local farmers that produces over 70% of the food that we consume are stuck with what we call high inventory. And you would know that.
And that is where I agree with you the way you situated as that this whole thing of food insecurity should be treated as a crucial question, problematizing it as a part of our development paradigm. And because we're trying to get away a little bit away from the focus of the book here, but within the broader scheme of the discussion, I think it's relevant. So, like you talk about inventory accumulation by local farmers, that only happens because of the lack of access to markets. And lack of access to market is explained by the depth of the state of your infrastructure, roads, for example. If farmers are unable to access markets, they would not be able to sell their produce at competitive market prices. And so there are two choices that they could have. One is to accumulate if they have storage where they can transfer those accumulated inventory to the next user cycle. It becomes a little bit profitable. But wherein they do not have storage, wherein they do not have storage, it means that they're going to be exposed to spoils.
That's true.
And then the next angle to that is, okay, there's a possibility of a middleman who now gives the farmers a discounted rate for their produce. So I agree that we need to problematize. We cannot just look at our development paradigm only as a way of building infrastructure. If you are building infrastructure, it must be directly connected to food production and food insecurity. But then but then I'm looking at your book. You talked about, you kind of, you situated that one of the problem with this whole MNCs, this whole international biotechnology movement on food production has created a situation where farmers now are dependent on transnational agribusinesses. And when I hear about that, then I think about things like AGOA.
Ah,
Which in my mind should be kind of beneficial for farmers in Liberia, because one of the big things that the agriculture ministry is focused on is value addition. I
correct.
have a kettle in my house here that comes from Liberia, was packaged. I was even told yesterday that people are now even producing liquid soap from palm oil in Liberia. They are packaging and exporting them to markets in this part of the world. So as I think that is where I have one problem with your work. I mean, in
Yeah,
terms of the
yeah,
effect,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
a number of
yeah.
effects, but maybe I just want to hear from you on that particular
Yeah,
question.
I think you should. First of all, I think my students should also be on this call, because just 2 weeks ago, the last chapter on the book that I co-published with Dr. James Gousset, uh, the seventh chapter, I believe, was on AGOA. And one of the assignments I gave my students is go. I want them, and my textbook was, of course, the book for the main primary text for the class. So the students had a problem with the fact that the conditions laid by AGOA itself does not really create any preferential treatment for African products. That at the end of the day, they have to compete with rice from China and palm oil from Malaysia. Palm oil is something we all used to do in Liberia. Suddenly, the Malaysian are not even selling palm oil anymore. They are selling it. They are now using it for biofuels. You know, so we also have to be innovative. But in the terms of being able to export our food, it is very important that we have to understand the international division of labor. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, the new
We
international division of labor. Yeah.
we don't really dictate what the value or the price of the commodities will be. The market forces does that. But when you look at the process in which food is either preserved or stored, and by the time it goes out for export, the value of the food coming out of our continent is also challenged. It's by that, by the spoilage. It's also challenged by competing food that have been created in what we call laboratories for modified crops. So at the end of the day, those kind of methods, they tend to encourage what we call accelerated yields. But accelerated yields tends to benefit certain part of the world. But what we don't often talk about is how do we better compete with the rest of the world when it comes to food crops, not even cash crops. When, if I'm going to go buy a corn, and we got enough beef in the continent in sub-Saharan Africa, we got to compete with guys from Argentina and Brazil, and they have everything in what we call purified stage that our farmers cannot compete with. Most of it's kind of high in sodium, and it's not even good for our health. But on the other hand, being able to enter into a global market with the kind of food we produce can be a challenge because of other food that are coming from other countries. Let's take bananas, for example. Americans will buy, if you go to your grocery store, most of the bananas are coming from where? Chile. But they have large scale industrial farms in Chile that produces for the American market. But what I've noticed when I go back home is that one of my very good, nice snack is our little bananas and my peanut roasted. It's a delicacy that I got from the days in school walking the street of Lagos. When I eat our corn, I gotta have my coconut there, and they're all very natural. But compare that to coconut coming from large-scale farming in Brazil. The marketing, the production and the marketing phase of our goods have to really be very competitive. And the international division of labor tends to give less attention to what we are doing. Even if you look in AGOA, the textile industry is the main is the bedrock of AGOA. How many yards of clothes are being bought from Togo? Togo is known as one of the key places in West Africa where you find unbelievable textile mixtures. But it's still very difficult for local textile producers to compete with textile coming from China to United States. So the preferential benefits of AGOA itself, it's not really sustainable for us. That would be the best way. Yeah.
I think that's because AGOA, the rules of origin, is very nebulous. If you say that we are opening our markets in the United States to jeans that are made in Lesotho, you must first consider, does Lesotho have the capacity? If Gap Jeans said we need 50,000 jeans, is Lesotho able to produce that? So if you have the Chinese firm going to Lesotho, hiring people from Lesotho to work in these things, the companies will be owned by Chinese, but it's coming, the origin, the place it's coming from is Lesotho. It says made in Lesotho, So I think that when you say AGOA or you say the African Continental Free Trade, it only privileges countries that are well governed and countries that have the capacity. Because if you know, Botswana is the only country that's sending beef to the EU. Why?
Correct.
Because EU has very specific requirements. Their meat cannot have this amount of fat. It must be preserved this way. So only Botswana is able to do that. But coming back to the indigenous knowledge and the indigenous crops and things like that, in your book you talk about the local context, but what happens when you have produced the food within your country, but the indigenous people have taste for other? Do you know what I mean?
That was going to be my next question. The role of taste.
Yes, because if you're producing rice, you're producing rice in Liberia, and then the people in the country are saying, no, we want the rice that they feed the pigs. Basically, we want this parboiled rice that has no nutritional value, but it tastes better according to them. So what's going to happen to this local food that is infused with vitamins in this? Don't you think, and I'm just surmising here, that don't you think that
that's fine.
It also be the job of the government to sell, I guess, when I say sell, that product to its people? Because like in Zambia grows corn. They have a lot of maize, right? And they sell the maize to Zimbabwe, and when they grow maize, the government buys the corn, buys the corn from the farmers, and then sells the corn to Zimbabwe. So I mean, I would say, no matter how you grow rice in Liberia, if the Liberians themselves don't want to eat that rice, what then, Prof? What's the solution to that?
Yeah, I like this question. It's very, very thought-provoking. I think Sam can correct me if I'm wrong, as a purist in economics, that countries typically will have enough food to consume, and it's the surplus value that you ought to be exporting.
Yeah.
We get that. But the inverse of that is, when you're not exporting enough of your surplus value, there are so many other factors that we need to think about. Some of it could be consumer preference as another determinant of demand. But on the other hand, what is not often factored in by most of us, but it is by most economists, but it's placed in other areas such as education and income. So what would make somebody who is a rural poor farmer to want to eat more Uncle Ben's rice or parboiled rice? It is the socialization. Some of us have become socialized in a way that is so contradictory to some of the values that we're used to. I grew up eating that country. I always wonder after 2 spoons, I'm full. And I was a chubby kid, but I can only eat so much of that stuff. But the idea is that it's far more nutritious. But what I see going on, not only in Liberia, go to the street of Lagos, go to Ghana, you will see what I call food chains that I never dreamt would ever cross the global village all the way to the continent of Africa. Church's Chicken. No, I can do better than that. KFC, Burger King. So we have become even more consumers of fast food chains. I was in Lagos, and very recently we have what we call Chicken Republic, but Chicken Republic has been, challenged by KFC. I see a Burger King. I see a Cold Stone. What is that? I mean, if I get a drink a glass of soda, it's going to be once in a blue moon. I mean, but we used to eat the hen and that walks around the yard. Now people have frozen hen. So we've all become socialized over time. Now you have parents taking their kids to Cold Stones in urban centers in Nigeria and in Liberia, and to all these wonderful. There used to be a place right on Tubman Boulevard next to Royal Hotel called Tenta Marie. It's an ice cream parlor. I mean, what are we doing in those kind of places? That's because we are being socialized differently how we were socialized 50 years ago. But the implications of that, Jackie, it is the health issue that we're not even paying attention to. Yes. 90% of what is being consumed, we don't even know the adverse effects of these things until people can start getting sick. Now, I don't have the data before me, but there's a rising number of people with diabetes, with health, life-threatening diseases. And we're wondering, why is this becoming prevalent? It's because of the nutritional value of what we're eating is different from what we grew up with. So the issue you are raising is that even if people in the rural area who's supposed to be the pioneer and the folks advancing good food, indigenous produced food, are saying, you know what, we want to go to Monrovia once a week or once a month to go and eat in a fast food restaurant. It depreciates the value of their health. And as a matter of fact, one of the farmers that I actually interviewed in this book in Bakbolo was an indigenous farmer, and my late farmer passed during COVID. So there's also other issues in the book that dealt with EVD, like the Ebola and even COVID. And all these things also are very challenging for food insecurity. And the Liberian case is even very difficult because right after the war, then we went through this economic surge in the cost of food. Then in 2004, here comes Ebola. Then after Ebola, then we have to recalibrate ourselves. So these are the challenges that, it will take us forever to talk about, but I hear you, Jackie. I often think about people in the urban areas being more attractive to imported foods. But in your case, you're even saying that rural folks don't want to eat the food they produce.
Yeah, I mean, and that's
Firestone, the Firestone impact may not be a very good example at this stage. But imagine what happened after Firestone entered Liberia, for example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Most of those who were attracted to that industrial side were farmers.
Right.
Right. And over time, they've lost taste for the locally grown rice. I was in company today with somebody from the agriculture ministry. And it's surprising. I mean, he put it very well. The government policy emphasizes rice importation over rice production.
Correct.
So talking about 20 million that you are thinking about. But then it's right, because if you begin to focus on rice production, you will think about developing infrastructure that support local rice production. You will think about developing storage facilities. I always argue that I'm not sure about now, but I didn't really see an embodiment of the agricultural ministry as a technical arm in local rice production, in not just rice alone, but local agriculture production.
Right.
They should be the one informing farmers.
Yeah.
But that's one aspect. To come back to the issue of indigenous knowledge, I'm worried because our knowledge informs how we behave.
Correct.
But most of the farming, the way we do farming, it's backbreaking. I'm not sure how many of us will go through that particular experience, would
Yeah.
want our children to go through a similar experience.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look at you had a low rate of return to primary agriculture. I'm worried about what the indigenous knowledge in this case could be.
Yeah. Okay. I like that question.
And
but-
before you answer that, Prof, let me add on to Samuel's question, because you say that 80% of the food is produced by women.
Yeah.
The gender
Yeah,
dimension.
so if you put the back-breaking work, and then you put all the women, producing the food, I want to add on the women before you answer that question.
Okay.
About,
The gender thing, the gender specific issue is very, very appropriate, and I have to go to a meeting very soon to address that. So I saw that coming before I knew you were going to ask me that question, Jackie. But the key thing here is that government policies itself. I didn't answer that part, and Sam, government policy itself is often very errant. It's often very errant. It's just not. It's so disarticulated that it does not really go to the depth of the development challenges. When government itself is promoting the dependency on imported foods, well, you got to understand some of the problems we face that led to the civil war in our country, with a hike in the price of rice and the rice riot and so on and so forth. There hasn't
just
been any
just so you know, the price of rice has increased over the last couple of days again.
Hello. So there are certain people who have the license to import rice. Who are those people, and who is buying those rice, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. Then the issue of where are we going in terms of this whole issue of importation and the backbone, the breaking processes of indigenous knowledge. Well, Jackie and Sam, the way I look at it is that the agro-technological process has not been able to address the problem. After 50 years of development approaches, we're still starving. So why do we throw the baby with the bad water? Why don't we keep some of what we use for production, indigenous production, and amalgamate it with a very safe approach to using technology? When 50, 100 years ago, let's just don't go 50 years ago, let's go 60 years back to Green Revolution. What we were told by these development multilaterals is that let's go with the accelerated food production. Yes, and Latin America, Southern Africa, we still see our folks holding the pans, asking for a bread here, a rice here. Well, at the same time, the socialization process was going on in terms of what we should eat, what is the value of it. I just think we need to sustain the IK, is what I call it, the indigenous knowledge, because if folks in Australia, even in current terms, are still using indigenous knowledge to address agricultural process in the community, I think they are still very important. What I think needs to have been more in-depthly addressed in the book as a limitation will have been, then if this is the case, and the World Bank and the United Nations with the Sustainable Development SDG has already recognized that, you know what, we can't do it without indigenous knowledge. That part of the problem we've had is that we fail to integrate indigenous knowledge in the development scheme. My argument is that indigenous knowledge, Jackie and Sam, shouldn't be in the back burner. It should be in the forefront of the development approaches to sub-Saharan Africa. So that's really the process I'm looking at. It's always often an afterthought. Yeah, you take a machete and a hoe and the ox. How much can you produce for consumption? But on the other hand, if the preferential, or what we call it, the taste preferences are changing, and the farmers themselves want parboiled rice, we've destroyed not only this, we've destroyed the socioeconomic values of what we do. So the idea that the Green Revolution hasn't worked and subsequent development approaches to dealing with food insecurity has not met its measure either, then these same development agencies and multilaterals are saying, I think we need to bring the indigenous people in and figure out how we can address this. So there's a recent recognition of how to amalgamate that indigenous approach with the modern one. My argument is that it needs to be in the forefront. You can marginalize the farmers, and through land tenure and so on and so forth, then you suggest that, well, they could be a beneficiary to credit that is not far reaching. Then you give the large scale, what we call the large holdings is what we call them in agriculture. Give them unbelievable loans, unbelievable machines. Even the case of Liberia in this book, if you guys go deeper, even with machines, there's been about 12%, less than 12% improvement in terms of food security in Liberia. So what's the point? Even with the machines, studies shows that even barely 12% benefited from the tractors and the machine. So what happens? The other thing is the attraction. In the case of Liberia, the Dutch disease. Now we have a little bit of oil in the coast. So more people are going to come to Monrovia looking for the good life, and then they're going to neglect the farms, and then we're going to have more food insecurity. The issue of the women, I'm sorry, and the gender issue.
Go ahead. I will take those things and come back.
The gender issue is not just limited to Liberia. I always believe, Jackie and Sam, that women are the backbone of development in most developing countries, and they are the furthest marginalized. Let's just start with land tenure. In some of our countries, it's very difficult for a woman to own property, but historically, because of the colonial process itself, has not given land tenure to most women. And then now that women are rising to the top of the economic ladder, and slowly is what I should say, slowly, not as rapid as you find in other parts of the world, it's still a challenge for our women, because some of them have 3, 4, 5 children. Then what we found out is that they're mostly involved in the production, in the productive process of food. Beyond the productive process, then, the work goes back to the men. Then the women very often will go to the marketplace to try to market the food, but who collects the revenue, and how much of the revenue goes into the hands of the women? I remember a few years ago, I was doing a development work, more or less a grant, USAID grant, where I was looking at dealing with rural market women in Liberia. It's amazing what these women are doing. They've figured something out, that through a collective work of microcredit, they can improve their own lot. Most of these women are mostly they're rural market women, but they are mostly involved in the productive forces. And it's very difficult for them, I'm not going to argue, for them to sustain production on the land because they're still using crude implement. Now, can you imagine if the Ministry of Agriculture, Sam and Jackie, will target over the entire counties in Liberia specific women and provide them the support system to expand on their community land, to grow rice, to grow corn, and just deal with the state, just people rice, just deal with that. And at the end of that, it's going to be a collaborative work between the government and these rural market women. But guess what? Nobody wants to see these women. Nobody wants to deal with them. So they have to figure a way to create the forces that will keep them competitive. A lot of them have to send those children to school with whatever they sell in the marketplaces, but it's very competitive because they have to compete with the parboiled rice seller and so on and so forth, because as you know, in economics, taste preferences sometimes determine demand. So the issue is so complex, guys, very, very complex. Yeah.
I think that, Sam, if I may, I just want to make 2 points. I think that it also comes down to the question of governance. You see, a lot of times our ministries are silos. They just think that, oh, this ministry, it can only do this thing. Now, if you look at, and I'll go back again to the example of Zambia, because I traveled there a lot.
Okay.
In Zambia, they have a town, right? A town, Masabuka. So Masabuka is responsible for growing sugarcane to make sugar. That's what the entire town does, is sugar. But what the government has done is to infuse the sugar with vitamin D3 for the little kids growing, for the strong bones. So the kids at the school, when you're going to buy sugar, you only get Zambia sugar because it's infused with vitamins, you know. Now, instead of looking at it as only the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Health, is it be Ministry of Health or Gender and Children, or Ministry of Health and Social Welfare, right? They can also work with the Department of Agriculture to say, look, let's buy this rice, right? Let's see how we can fix this rice and have a breakfast in the morning or lunch for our kids, so they can get vitamins in them. I mean, that's just an aside. One of the things you said that's very interesting is talking about putting indigenous knowledge systems or indigenous knowledge food systems in the forefront of development. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the large corporations that are heavily invested in food production for profit, right? Now, you know that even you said that in your book, and even in India, even when we're growing up, our parents would, my great-grandmother would keep seeds and plant it the next year, right? And you've seen the amount of suicides that have happened to farmers in India because Monsanto has taken them to court. They're not allowed to keep seeds, right? Those Terminator seeds are not allowed to be kept for the following year. They have to buy seeds every year. And in your book, you talk about cotton, right? So we have the United States not ratifying the WTO thing on cotton, but subsidizing the farmers at the tune of $2 billion a year. So the farmers don't care if the cotton prices goes up or down; they still get subsidized by the American government. Whereas in Mozambique, the farmer who's growing cotton, which is of a much better quality, if the cotton price goes down, he's done. There's no subsidy from his government. All of those expenses are his. So my question is, how can these indigenous systems that have been so marginalized and are now powerless in the global structure, how can they demand, or how can they be placed in the forefront or work together with these organizations that don't see them as important in this value chain?
Gee, Jackie, this is a tough one. And to be honest with you, I've somewhat thought about this whole process, and we go from the issue of the International Division of Labor, which is at the crux of some of this problem, and the fact that multilaterals, even our government, will not support the smallholders, and they are further put in the back burner. And the real question is, let me get straight to your point. How do we bring them to the forefront, Jackie? You know, we like to theorize, but I like this book because of the practical aspect of it is that it's going to take you, Sam, and I to continue to do the kind of work either in development and writing this great work and going to the forefront of the international community to say, okay, this is where we stand. And we need to let you know that this issue of IK and the minority farm holders need to be taken serious. And then we need to educate our folks even more. I always think about the tertiary education, for example, play an important role. I remember when I was in school in Nigeria, I was in and out of Nigeria because of civil war at one time or the other, back and then, we used to take agricultural science in school, and which means every one of us have a little piece of plot, not a whole lot of plot, but a little piece of space that we can grow our corn. And so I have a friend of mine who does a lot of work with extension farmers in Zaria, Ahmadu Bello, a classmate of mine. He got the interest in agricultural science from those little projects we did. I was too lazy to do a lot of growing. I was a footballer. So the thing is, you help me with my rice or my corn, you definitely going to play the pickup game with me. But the point is that, real agriculturalists came out of those kind of classroom, practical approaches. If you go and look at our education system in some of our countries, they don't even teach history anymore. They don't even teach agricultural science, and it's not part of the curriculum. So, it's not a one way fix it all. It's got to be very integrative. The educational system has to integrate agricultural science. We as scholars, we ought to continue, Jackie, to continue to do that work that places us and places those marginalized farmers in the forefront of the development approaches. We gotta continue to do that. And then we pray that the issue of governance, I don't understand. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. That's a big problem. I mean, and I'm not trying to digress. We just spent almost $2.something million for us to go and watch the World Cup in Qatar. I mean, with entourages from the executive. What's that? Well, what's that? Do you know what even half of that can do for agricultural production in Liberia? The priorities are misplaced, Jackie, and that's the point. We have what we call a disarticulated economic structures in most of these developing countries. When the banking industry does not accommodate rural, low-income farmers, that's a problem. When there's no connection between the agricultural sector and the banking sector and the energy sector, that's a problem. So the entire economic system, it's so disarticulated. But I got good news for us. Let's go take a look, and I know you guys are tired of hearing this, but let's look at what is going on in Rwanda with Kagame there. They went through stuff just like everybody else, but on the other hand, they produces what? Coffee. But somehow that's going to open another discussion entirely, because I was in Rwanda in 2007 as a consultant for is it USAID or somebody educating on how can we use higher education to address our social economic problems. There were folks from the University of Liberia, there were folks from Covington, and everybody came there. And then what happens after that? There have to be a continuity. There is this stopgap approach to our development. Jackie, I wish I had a better response to that. I think it's a collective responsibility is exactly what I'm talking about, and dear us, we're in serious trouble. I mean, go look at the cost of a bag of rice in the street of Monrovia today. I'm not even sure. I was there in June, and I was just afraid to ask people, how you doing? We are very friendly people in Liberia. Hey, my man, how you doing?
They can. I'm sorry, Prof. I think that they can subsidize their food. I don't eat rice. I'm because I'm pre-diabetic. I eat buckwheat. I'm in the United States and I don't eat rice. I eat buckwheat and couscous. So people need to diversify their diet.
Jackie, I agree with that point, but along with that point is a question of income. and inequality.
Are you telling me buckwheat is expensive in Liberia?
Not many persons will want to afford that. I mean, I'm looking at a portion here in Dr. O's book. I'm looking at the time where he talks about somewhere you talk about how culture informs.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think we all
He talks
almost
about how culture informs.
Culture informs the indigenous systems, or but Sam,
How our own world view. I've just skipped the page now.
but the
yeah.
culture, but
I'm
imported
coming back
rice
to
is
that
not
point.
our culture.
We've been socialized over a period of time to adapt that
Yeah.
as a status symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe it's time to re-strategize because
That's
it's not
one
working.
aspect. It's a complex problem. Even the issue of governance, for example, that we're all talking about.
Yeah.
Somebody could push back and say, well, we have a participatory governance framework. And then I always remind people, in as much as it is participatory, as you may claim, they open up the sector now to public involvement. But even in that level, there are limitations. The issue of participation versus consultation.
You know, when you think about
One
what
part
you're
about the
saying,
element program was consulting with the locals, right? But here's
yeah,
the challenge with consultation. Consultation is, Jackie, yeah, we decided to write this book. What do you think? Oh, I agree, it's a good book. Oh, I don't like it. Please go and change this. That's the extent of your involvement. You cannot question the outcome. You have no way to go back and evaluate the outcome. So, as Dr. O is talking about bringing local farmers to the forefront, bringing indigenous knowledge to the forefront, my question is the power structure.
Hmm.
How do you address that power
Sam,
structure?
that's another book entirely. But you know,
Maybe you can
if I
think
had
about
another,
that.
yeah, but I think you're absolutely correct. The power structure, it's really a challenge. You know, and that's why the marginalization has
Mhm.
continued. You know, I mean, and that's why the miseducation, Jackie, has continued. You know, for you and I, you know, you and I are in the same position when it comes to this issue of rice. But every now and then, I'll mix my rice with what do you call it, with the veggie rice or what have you. Then I'll look at the kitchen and make sure my wife is not around. Every now and then, I want to taste a little bit of that other stuff. I said, man, look at what we're missing. Somebody needs to educate me. It's taking me 40 plus, Jackie, to understand that, you know, for me, that rice thing, you know, easy. I like to pile my plate with good rice. But now,
Dr. O, you're making me hungry now.
yeah, but I can't go there no more, Jackie. But I have to be educated. I had to be socialized differently. I had to come to
Yeah.
this part of the world to even understand that. My father didn't have that alternative. The only alternative he had to return back to that bitter leaf juice. So I see my mother has several bottles of bitter leaf juice inside the fridge. So I go in there and say, what is this? They say, don't touch it. That's Papa's bitter leaf juice there. And you say, Emmanuel, just taste it. It's good for you. But you know, and some of the time, some of these things are very, very difficult to consume. But one of the things I want to highlight, apart from this issue of food insecurity, I also highlighted the benefits of our food and dealing with
Mhm.
agricultural development. For example, goats. You find out things such as cannabis sativa is used to rub the backside of the goat when the goat is having some kind of production.
Mhm.
I mean, those things were real fun for me. I had to interview people about that. I tell you what, we just need a lot of education. The idea is, you know, like Jackie's saying, is how do we bring all this together? How do we ensure that people understand that she can eat buckwheat, but the people in Liberia don't want to eat that rice? What's that? They all turn into parboil. So if you invite them, whether you invite them from the countryside or from the urban side, they don't want to eat that stuff.
No.
So something has happened that has changed that taste preference, Sam. That determinants has really moved people away from that. But
Yeah.
then when you're talking about income, how can somebody who has 5 kids make less than $2 a day be thinking about power? It doesn't make sense economically
Okay.
too.
So here's where I'm coming from, right?
Uh-huh.
The rural farmers over a period of time they suffer losses almost every year. You
True.
talk about the issue of the lack of capital.
Correct.
Once they do not have capital to replenish those losses, their farming capacity reduces.
Yes.
True.
They're also unable to attract other implements to enhance productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, they begin to do a form of cost-benefit analysis. Do I go into agri-production, or do I redivert my energy to something else
Yeah.
that will give me an income that I can use to buy the Powerball rice or whatsoever rice now they call it in Monrovia.
Right. Right.
So it becomes a question of not just taste, it becomes a question of income.
Yeah.
And so over time, people adapt these tastes. They find it difficult to go back. I'm a boy who grew up eating what we call the country rice, that reddish rice.
Yeah.
Yes,
What
but
Mind you now,
Go ahead, Jackie.
but mind you that if guys see you eating that particular kind of rice, the next thing the question is your status.
and who cares?
It comes back
really,
to our
I really don't care.
socialization. What are those symbols that were attached to economic advancement?
Okay.
So you
But
notice,
the
like,
person is not economically advancing. You see, even if they're eating this rice and they have to beg to get the money, they are not economically advancing. So we
I
have to
agree.
put this thing aside of this status symbol that Liberians can be dying inside, but they must look good outside.
That is
You
what we
know?
have now, this clash of values, Jackie.
Yeah, it's really a clash of values. You know, you see people all dressed up and they don't have a penny in their pockets. We have to reevaluate. But one of the things I wanted to ask, Sam, I'm sorry, I know,
Go ahead.
is coming back to Professor O's book.
Mhm.
Yes, Sam is saying that, okay, the farmer may say, you know what, I'm not going to keep doing back-breaking work. I'm going to divert my energy somewhere else. But then we come to something that may change how we see status and how we eat. And Professor O mentioned that in his book, climate-induced food insecurity. Yeah. So now look. Yesterday I posted two photographs. 2018, I had to dig my car out of the snow.
Okay.
To the same 2022, there's no snow in here, right? So now we see that Africa is the one being impacted the most by climate change.
Correct.
So we come now to this food insecurity. What's going to happen to the taste and everything of the local people? Because now they will have to change because of this climate-induced food insecurity.
Certainly. And I think ultimately, one of the things I think we should also think about very quickly is the fact that even some of our rural farmers, if they adapt, when they do adapt mixed farming, they also respond to certain conditions that certain time of the year, perhaps they give themselves some leverage that, if the rice production is low, they can always rely on corn. So the traditional and the little I learned about that systemic approach is that when you diversify the production process and so on and so forth, you also create the leverage in case certain harvest falls short. And a lot of the times, what you find a lot of these farmers do is that they will go and sell what they need to sell because they always have enough left for subsistence reason, but they don't dictate that market itself. If that market is proliferated with imported food, and that creates a problem. They are stuck in Monrovia or wherever they may be to sell the product either at a lower price and go back to the rural area and take as much as they can back with them in terms of revenue. But the idea of the climate-induced food insecurity also is a thing to think about. I'm glad you saw that part in the text, and you will also read in there the different conditions in which the farmers have responded to that kind of food insecurity. We what I'm very encouraged about, Jackie, not to go to dive too deep into these things, that a lot of our folks have this knowledge. We have the knowledge to deal with some of the challenges we are facing globally. The socialization process is also a big challenge in the sense, and I'm trying to find this balance as I was writing this book, that if we have the knowledge to deal with flood, still being able to produce food in coastal cities and so on and so forth, what's stopping us from moving it along? And you guys have identified the problem of leadership, the problem of governance. Sam also mentioned the issue of the power issue. The power issue is very, very important. I remember a few years ago during Madam Ellen Johnson's administration, there was a well-known agriculturalist and Minister of Agriculture who received millions of dollars to deal with problem of insects and tsetse fly and in the rural. The money never got to the people. The money never got to the people. So they lost a whole year, 2 years of production. And this is one of ours who was educated in the West. And some of us go back home and even do worse than, you know where I'm coming from this. So setting priorities and making decisions even when we're being given development funds in a way that improves the lives of our people, amalgamated with indigenous knowledge, can take us far. So there's no one way to fix it all. It's a complex problem that has to be integrated into the development scheme. I don't know, but I think
I know. I mean, when I go to Ghana, my suitcase when I'm coming back is nothing but pure cocoa. I just bring cocoa because I love the cocoa because it's pure.
Yeah.
So,
And the other
yes,
thing, you have to give incentives to local manufacturers. One of the things, I go to Ghana a lot because I take students there. I spend a lot of time in University of Ghana. I do some work with them. You've got local farmers, local folks now doing chocolate. And one of the byproducts of chocolate is cocoa. You don't have to go to Switzerland because those kids in Ghana, where the farmers make less than $2 in the cocoa farm, cannot afford $2 a day, cannot afford a Snicker bar that costs about $7 in America that's imported to Ghana, and so on and so forth. Those are real issues that, and the complexities of these things. So I'm glad you get cocoa. I tried once in a while. I'm not there yet.
I think we should read some comments, but yeah, I think that, and now that Ghana and Ivory Coast, they've joined to set their own price for cocoa, I think more and more countries in Africa should do that, because I think WTO still set the price for coffee. Why?
Yeah, they do.
Why should they set the price for coffee? So talking incentives.
I think you guys should, I think in the context of that you guys should read the book that I got out last year in 2021 on capital accumulation in Africa. There's a lot of case studies on Ghana, Ivory Coast, and the cocoa industry there. And that's more even apt to what you're saying, Jackie.
Yeah, I mean, and that is why I say the question of whether indigenous knowledge is incorporated into food production systems as a form of development. It's really largely a governance challenge. Because governance determines everything. And, this may not be a good quote, but I know Amartya Sen in his book Development as Freedom said one thing that was very striking. In countries where you do not have a free press, there is bound to be food insecurity.
Yes.
And the issue of free press is tied strictly to governance and voice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me read some of the comments. Okay. And the book we are discussing is by Professor Emmanuel Oritsejafor, and is Indigenous Knowledge: An Alternative for Food Security and Wellness in Africa. And we will definitely put it in the chat. So Emmanuel Jackson is watching from Boston, and Jason Carr Jason, hi, Jason. Hi, Emmanuel. They're watching. Jason is watching from Ohio. Emmanuel
Oh,
Jackson writes, what's very essential to maintain our traditional values of our culture, food, medicine, or spiritual values is the elimination of corruption in our governance systems in Africa, particularly West Africa. There are a lot of imitations overshadowing our traditional natural resources, specifically from China. Priscilla Nyanitor says, Yo, hello, Jackie and team. Our socialization is that when we buy processed or imported food, we are doing well. It's a sign of prosperity. It's unfortunate, but it's true. We will leave the fresh produce in the market and we go to Abijadi supermarket to buy food that have been canned for months. Then it took months to get them on our shelves in our supermarket. We feel accomplished when we buy those things from Randall Street Supermarket. We are
mm,
such interesting people, but yep. When I first came over here, somebody asked me whether Starbucks was in Liberia. When I said no, not that I was aware of, he said Liberia was really behind time. Did not
mm,
even have Starbucks there. I couldn't believe that someone thought having Starbucks was supposed to be a sign of development and advancement in a country like Liberia
mhm,
without considering how much of the population is coffee drinking or something of this sort. And she goes on to say, rice can get people hard time to leave parboiled and firestone pusawa as signs of accomplishment. Remember socialization. She goes on to say, I remember a co-worker asking me why I was working at where we were working and I wasn't
mm,
sending for Firestone rice and how the co-worker used to send the Firestone Pusawa from her bell. And then
mhm.
I think this is for me. She said, says Jackie, we're not suggesting that it shouldn't change or that it is right. We are pointing out what it is. Yeah, okay. So
I
so
think the
that's it.
audience I think the audience are very exact in terms of some of the issues that we've pointed out, from the power issue to governance, as Sam puts it. I think we can all agree on that. We can also agree that the socialization process, it needs to be addressed. The cultural factor is very important. The limitation of my work is that I didn't go too far into the governance issue. Part of it is because there was another project that went into the issue of governance and capital accumulation in 2021, and I just wanted to go just dovetail. I just dovetail into this issue of the agricultural food insecurity stuff. But definitely, if one should say, okay, let's do a book review here and critique this, it would be like, okay, Dr. O, what happened to the governance issue itself? And I think what I did was, and I don't like taking credit for the lack thereof of what I didn't do or did, was not as an excuse at least, was that I went into a section in the book where I was dealing with the colonial structure and the
Okay.
post-colonial framework of development. And that's
Yeah.
what I'm really after, and how they've contributed to the further marginalization and the lack of integration of sound processes for dealing with that. But it will have been nice to talk a little bit about issue of governance, which I did in the section on Zimbabwe. You know, that even
Yes.
after colonialists left, you still have a problem with people like Mugabe and all these other people who basically even further marginalize women along the way. So I wish I could do it all, but yeah, that's where my limitations are. Absolutely. I take responsibility for that. Yeah.
Well, I don't think you alone should take responsibility. I think this is something I should have done in the interest of full disclosure at the start of the show. I'm one of the endorsers of the book, so I should also share that responsibility
Yeah.
because my name is right at the back.
So,
I forgot that part until I turned the book around. I'm like,
oh
oh, I'm
yeah.
here.
I put you on the spot, Sam.
Yeah, yeah.
But Jackie raised the issue of the gender piece. The gender piece is so important because I have to give a background about that. As I was working on this, I talked about women. I've always, I got into this whole thing, even taking a class on patriarchy in grad school, and it's amazing how interesting that was for me, coming from an environment where I had strong matriarchs, and they played an important role in all of our development. but they're often not given the credit
Mm-hmm.
in terms of even managing food insecurity in the house. You find out how do we all, about six of us, are able to do with 1 cup of rice, and then the 1 cup of rice look like mama has cooked 5 cups, but we're able to get fresh produce in the house, and but we can't store it because of power outage, and frozen food is very difficult to maintain. Wonder, why do our parents go to the marketplace every day? Because the infrastructure is so poor, and it makes it
Yeah.
very challenging for them to keep storage. So there's other aspect of food insecurity we have to look at the individual level, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And women and even some men play an integral role in ensuring that there's continuity and it doesn't lead to further food insecurity. And that's a challenge. There's a chapter in there on biofuels and energy.
Yeah.
And that's very important that we look at how do we use our indigenous energy to address food insecurity in certain parts. I know that some countries in Africa have used bio waste to produce energy. And we will do some of these things, and this part of the governance, and we will just drop it and just continue because somebody is making money from the generator business. Or you go to Lagos, half of Lagos is polluted, not just by the terrible traffic and cars, but every household has a generator facing one another. I don't even know how people breathe in that place, and so there's so many challenges and complexities that goes with health, food insecurity, and so on and so forth. But I have to really thank the Liberian Studies Association for giving me that capacity to even think beyond the 2004 lead article in the Liberian Studies Journal that dealt with folk medicine or indigenous medicine and mental health at a time when Liberia was just coming out of the Civil War. What do we do now? So from there, I began to develop other ideas about agriculture and food insecurity and so on and so forth. Yep.
I think that most of the time when we talk about indigenous knowledge or indigenous crops, we tend to look at indigenous crops when we're sick. Like we all tend to like, oh, let's drink lemon tea, lemongrass or thing. So those things
Yeah.
are the norm because people do it here too. You
Yeah,
get
yeah, yeah.
COVID, they say, oh, take turmeric. So growing up, we know that our parents use herbs and things to
Right,
help us
right.
to feel better. And
Mhm.
even and Professor, oh, you're aware of this about the Bushmen, the San people, the Khoi
Yeah,
Khoi
yeah.
in South
Mhm.
Africa. That
Mhm.
that 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 little root that they used to chew and go hunting, and they will hunt for days and don't feel hungry,
Mhm.
right? And Pfizer took that little root and made it into a diet pill.
Yeah,
But they
yeah.
sued Pfizer and they got millions of dollars. That's indigenous knowledge being taken away, or the roots being taken away because Pfizer tried to patent that.
Right.
So I think that it's a conglomeration of a lot of things. It's a change of mindset,
Mhm.
because for me, I'm already thinking about, oh, when I go home, I want to get my red rice and things like that. I really don't. I mean, my great grandmother didn't have time for no status symbol. You ate
Mhm.
what you got. When she cooked it, you ate it.
Mhm.
She didn't care. Maybe we would eat
Yeah,
cassava on
yeah.
Sunday, but we would eat whatever she would give us to eat. So I think that there must be a socialization of people, especially with this coming shortage of fuel, of land.
Mhm. Mhm.
Even we have foreign governments, foreign
Mhm.
organizations coming to Africa
Mhm.
and leasing hundreds of acres of land and
Mhm. Mhm.
growing food and taking it away. Sam, this. Even universities, if you go to IFPRI, they have a chart. United Arab Emirates have thousands of acres of land in Tanzania, and then we
Mhm.
have even Russia, even Croatia. There's so many that are leasing land in Africa. And then
Correct.
we have the book Africa Works. that Africa has 80% of the world's arable land. How can we have 80% and we can't grow food to feed ourselves? So, like Sam said, it's farm to market roads. It's the marginalization of local agriculture when really we shouldn't be importing food, especially not in Liberia, with the fertile soil that we have. And if you look at our history books, you see that we were exporting coffee, we were exporting tons of food before, and from there to food insecurity, that's not something that we should look at lightly. Yeah, but I really enjoy the book. I think I put the
Jackie, before you wrap up, I think I
no, no,
want
no.
that
I was
question.
just saying that I put the link, I think, in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the last chapter in this book is the way forward, which is something I like. And one of the issues to talk about here is polyculture and development. I mean, in the next few minutes, whether you could just, I don't think it's something we talk about much in this discussion.
Right. Culture and development. I think. Thank
We
you.
talk about
I think.
polyculture, the issue of what pest management.
Yeah. I think what really needs to happen is that the idea of development often, as it goes historically, has been driven by exogenous factors. More of external developers who are saying this is the way forward, Africa or sub-Saharan Africa or America. As I said initially, even that has not brought about real substantive and sustainable development, outcomes. And now that these development agencies and multilaterals, if you put them in the broader context, are saying something has to give. We've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars dealing with the relationship between poverty and hunger. And there's a projection, 20 something, 50, that, they're going to have poverty and hunger in Africa. How are you going to do that without understanding the cultural context in which you intend to have that poverty and hunger? The best thing is to do exactly what is to amalgamate that cultural context and bring in the folks who are directly impacted by that development policies into the forefront of the development decisions. Very often, they're not participants in the development decisions. They are basically brought in after to ensure that a semblance of integration is created. So the policies don't ever go anywhere. So we cannot wait for another green revolution to happen, because the issue of governance and leadership and power, it's a challenge, Sam and Jackie. But we have to, people like myself and you and every one of us who are interested in the future of Africa agricultural development, need to agitate that the local farmers ought to be considered as participant in the process, not in the back burner, but in the forefront of the process. But that will take a real progressive government and a good act of governance to ensure that that becomes part of the bigger plan. So the argument here is that we have to look at best practices. So I had about a couple of best practices there on how to address some of this problem. But the crux of it is that, without these indigenous folks, we're going back. We're going to revert to what happened in the 70s with the accelerated approach, because most of the approach still remain very accelerated. Let's find a quick fix to have higher yields and high yields that we can't even sustain. And then, you look at the issue of seedlings, for example. Most of the local farmers who make less than $2 a day can't buy those seedlings. And then their land is even taken away from them. And then in the large scale holdings, sometimes in the process of using those sophisticated and engineered seedlings, some of that is blown to the rural small farm holders. that end up killing their crops or destroying the farmlands. So there's a whole lot of issues here that falls within the contradiction of governance, both from a local and global level. And I'm always perturbed, guys, about one thing. Who are those people who represent us at the table? And what kind of representation do we get when they get to the table? And there lies one or two of the dilemma that we faced, or we have faced in the past, and will continue to face. Because if our policy approach is disarticulated, I'm not sure whether some of these folks really have our interest at heart. So we do have a lot of issues. So I'm not sure, Sam. I think that would be my best, that would be my postscript to your question.
That was good. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah. So Prof, we know that you and Sam, both of you profs have to get ready for work tomorrow, and I and the viewers as well as myself. So we want to say thank you so much for joining us on this Liberian Scholar Series, the LSA Scholar Series. We will put the link on the website, the LSA website, so that people can watch it again. And if I may just put another plug for the LSA, our 54th, the Liberian Studies Association 54th annual conference will be on April 27th to the 29th, 2023. It will be hosted by Dr. Oritsejafor, who was representing the North Carolina Central University. And the conference's theme is Repositioning Liberia's Development, Dynamism, Innovation, and Challenges in the New Millennium. So please, if you have a paper, an abstract, Sam is eagerly waiting for it. Please submit your papers and meet us in North Carolina. It's a time to chat about Liberia, a time to discuss things, a time to strategize about the LSA for 2024. We want to thank you all. JCN says he's sending his abstract, which is very good.
Okay.
Jason,
That's good, Jason. It'll be nice to have you back.
Yes,
That's
you
good.
have to come. You have to come back so we can meet again. This will be the first one after the COVID. So we are all looking forward to it. And I've put it again in the chat. I've pasted the LSA website. You can please visit it, and also you can watch the videos from the past LSA. Jason said he missed LSA. Yes, we miss you too. We all will be there. So please submit your abstracts and be ready for a productive 2.5 days at NCCU. Prof, want to say thank you so much. Yes. And we could go on, but we will continue the discussion at the LSA.
We can continue this discussion for the rest of the night. We wouldn't end.
It'll be nice. It'll be nice for us to even have a roundtable at the conference on this, because you guys are.
I'm open to it.
Yeah, because
you too. I already have my roundtable, so you two can do your
roundtable.
Okay,
so between Sam and I, and you'll be at the roundtable too. So you're gonna double deep, because there's so many important issues here that I think it's very difficult within the framework of time to cover it all. Because there's a chapter on COVID in the book. There's a chapter on COVID.
Yes.
Know why do we have a prevalence of COVID issues here compared to how people dealt with it in Africa? What are we doing differently? I mean, not to prolong this, but we got to do more. So hopefully the conference in Durham in 2023 will give us opportunity to look even further deeper into these issues. I just want to thank yourself, Jackie and Sam, for bringing me on, and it's a great opportunity to share some of my work. I'm still evolving in this whole process of looking for a better way to address our development challenges. The mindset of just not talking about the problem, but being a little bit more prescriptive in terms of how we should look for the future solutions to some of our problems. It's what is really driving me forward with some of the projects that I'm been partaking in. So this is definitely one of them that I couldn't just wait to finish. So thank you also for all the support you guys have given my humble self over the years. And I'm very, very blessed and fortunate to be part of your community. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And for 54 years, well, we're not that old, but for 54 years, we've been meeting. So the 54th, 53 years. So the 54th LSA will be in North Carolina. So please join us. And don't forget, we'll end with our closing song. We're all Liberians. So whether you subscribe to Indigenous knowledge systems or you're the modern person, we're all Liberians. So thank you. Good night. Good night, Sam. Prof. Night.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.